This world is not your home. You are different.
Hi everyone, good morning. Thanks for joining us in this kind of odd service today again. We're going to continue our series today, Different, and I'm so glad you're here. You know, the funny thing is that I and many others of my generation, and I've got a feeling that it's not just my generation, it's probably most generations, we spend a lot of time, and I mean a lot of time, trying to fit in. And we often spend so much time trying to fit in that we can often forget who we are, and we can forget, sometimes unfortunately, we can even forget about God. Today, as we continue our series Different, we're going to look at different values in an unholy culture. You know, as Christians, it's not always enjoyable, it's not always fun to feel different. Because our values are different, it doesn't feel good when people look at us in different ways that maybe we don't quite feel comfortable with. You know, because as Christians, we don't often spend our money on the same things that other people spend their money on. We don't watch the same things. We don't listen to the same things. We don't even think the same things that many of those who are not Christians think. And so for us, it can be very awkward to be different and to have different values in a culture that is very unholy. You know, none of us like to think of ourselves as trying to fit in with the crowd, but the fact is that is exactly what we spend so much of our lives doing. And I think especially in our early years, and if you're a student or a teenager watching this today, or maybe even you're still in elementary school, I think this message today is important for you to understand, because I think a lot and I pray a lot for our next generation, because our culture is changing so much, and it's changing and it's getting further and further away from God, and I'm concerned for our kids and their future and what Christian faith is going to look like. You know, our culture is always talking about being different. It says, be different and say it's okay, but let me tell you, a lot of that is just talk. Really, it's about being different as long as you fit in. And unfortunately, as Christians, we don't always fit in with some of the values that we have. You know, too often, what we see going on in our world is that we are falling all over each other to try to be like everyone else. And that is not what Jesus has called us to do. He's called us to follow Him. And He's called us to be different, to have different values in an unholy culture. I want to first thank Travis last week for starting off our series Different so well. He kind of laid out what the book was about, as we're going to look in 1st and 2nd Peter during this series, and how he talked about the various types of persecutions that those in the early church were facing. And as Jesus followers today, we too face different persecutions. Now, maybe not the same kind as they did in the first century, but there are things that are, I guess what you could say, indirect persecution, because our values are different. You know, those who received the book in these two books, in 1st and 2nd Peter, were receiving it under a circumstance of persecution. It was physical, it was mental, it was emotional, and it was relational. There were many Christians whose families were divided because they had decided to follow Jesus. And Peter here in this book starts by challenging the reader to keep their eyes on Jesus. And that's what Travis helped us think about last week. You know what? The same, though, is true for us today. We have to keep our eyes on Jesus, because the fact of the matter is that it is not easy. It is not easy to be different. It isn't easy to be different. I mean, throughout our lives, we spend so much of it wanting to be accepted. We want to be accepted within our families. We want to be accepted within our school. We want to be accepted in our relationships, in our workplaces. We want to be accepted in the communities that we're in generally. Being different is who we are, but it's not always what we try to be. See what I mean is that so often we think we want to be different, but we don't really try to be different. And so as Christ followers, we often end up emulating and resembling the culture with which we're in. And so today I want us to think a little bit about what it looks like to be different, to have different values in this culture. And so let's go ahead and dig into the text. We're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 1. We're going to start in verse 13, and then we're going to go into chapter 2, verse 3. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll read it together here on the screen. It says, "Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Be self-controlled. Set your hope fully on the grace to be given you when Jesus Christ is revealed." See, we shouldn't, what he's saying here as we start looking at this is we shouldn't be different because of what we don't do, but we should be different because of what we do. You know, so often what ends up happening is we as Christians are known for what we are against. We did a series on this a couple of years ago. No, instead, God wants us to impact our communities, and He wants our world to know what we are for. Now, let's keep reading here. As obedient children, in verse 14, "As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had," notice he says there in the past tense, "you had when you lived in ignorance." You know, a lot of what we're talking about here today is conformity, and in many ways, conformity is the result of inaction. Okay, what does that mean? What do I mean when I say in many ways that conformity is a result of inaction? What it means is we just kind of accidentally, without any kind of action, fall into fitting in with everyone else. And that happens in our faith. When we don't allow God to move in us in a forward direction and grow us, like it says here, like Peter writes here, when we, in the past tense, when we lived in ignorance. See, often we continue to live in ignorance. And we don't allow God to move in our hearts. See, the thing is that we're either drawing closer to Jesus or we're not. It's that simple. There is no stagnancy in our walk with Jesus. We're either growing closer to Him or we aren't. Now look at verse 15 and 16. "But just as He called you who is holy, so be holy in all you do, for it is written, 'Be holy because I am holy.'" So we see here, "Be holy because I am holy." Now, there's something really important here. You'll notice here that I underlined the word "be." And I want us to look here at the original language, all right? So let's look at the original language and what it teaches us about this word. Because you might think, oh, the word "be," what kind of a, it's not a big word in a text, but it's really big here. And if you look at the original language, what it means is to be occupied with. So if we look at the passage here, "For it is written, be occupied with holiness because I'm holy." In other words, it should be on the forefront of our minds. It should be what we're thinking of. The importance of being occupied with is essential in this passage. It's perhaps one of the biggest differences between someone who is different and someone who isn't, is what they are occupied with. What do you spend your time thinking about? What are you focused on? Well, too many times we're not occupied with being holy. Now let's keep reading here. In verse 17 it says, "Since you call on a Father who judges each man's work impartially, live your lives as," some versions say strangers, some versions say foreigners, okay? "But live out your time as strangers here, as foreigners here, in reverent fear." Now this is another important word. Let's go ahead and look at the original language again, okay? So it's this word Parakia, okay? And what this word means, it's a temporary stay as a foreigner, often with limited rights. Often the term is translated as a stranger, but it goes much deeper. It's a person that is out of place with limited rights. Here's the thing that we have to get comfortable with as Christ followers. We are so busy fighting for our rights that we forget that this is not our home. This isn't our home. We have limited rights here. And what I mean is that this world is an imperfect, unholy place. We're just passing through. And so instead of trying to fight for our rights, instead we have to realize that we're foreigners, that we're strangers here. And what we do is we hold firm to the truth of Jesus Christ, and we show love to others. That's what God's called us to do. And yet too many times we're busy fighting and stirring up fights and fighting for our rights. No, we're strangers here. And I know that's uncomfortable for many of us. but it's the truth. We are strangers in this land. And that's exactly what Peter is saying here with this term, as I just showed you. In verse 18, he says, "For you know that it was not with perishable things, such as silver or gold, that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your forefathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect." See, many of the people that were receiving these letters from Peter were Jews, and they thought that their salvation came just because of their ancestry. They thought they were saved just because they were Jews, and here Peter is saying, whoa, wait a minute here. Your riches, your family, your future is because of what Jesus has done for you. And it's no different for us today. It's not because of what you've done. It's because of who you're loved by and who you've been bought by. And you've been bought by Jesus. Now in verse 20, he goes on. He says, that Jesus was chosen before the creation of the world. There we see Jesus' nature, right? His eternal nature. It points to us that Jesus is God. It says, he was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. Though through him you believe in God, who raised him from the dead and glorified him, and so your faith and your hope are in God. See, once again, it's a theme we see throughout the Scriptures, and Jesus even says it himself. He says that he is the way, that he is the truth, and that he is the life. The one and only way. It's only through him that we have hope. You know, one cannot believe in God and not in Jesus. They're both one and the same. A few days ago, I was listening to a podcast. It was an interesting one. It's through a Christian satire site. It's on social media and whatnot, but they do podcasts. It's called the Babylon Bee, and they had a podcast with who I think is either one or the most or the second most wealthiest person in the world, and that person is Elon Musk, as you can see him sitting right here. Elon Musk has started numerous companies. I'm sure you've heard of him. Tesla, SpaceX, among other companies. He's a multi-billionaire. Some people are saying he might even become the first trillionaire. But this interview with him was very interesting, and I would encourage you, if you want to check it out, you can go on YouTube and look it up. Just look up Elon Musk, Babylon Bee, and watch it. It's a pretty long interview. It's a couple hours long. And I will warn you, there's a couple little things in it, so just be aware of that. But at the very end, because this is a Christian organization, these guys around the table asked Elon Musk if he would put his faith in Jesus Christ. Now, I thought that was really cool that they did that. But his response to them was something that was interesting. He said this. He said, "I believe in what Einstein believed, and that is the God of Spinoza." And I'm like, what is that? I've never heard that before, so I checked it out. And here's how Einstein defined it. He said, "I believe in Spinoza's God," which Spinoza was a Jewish philosopher many centuries ago who believed that God revealed himself in the orderly harmony of what exists, but that he doesn't concern himself with people, that he's not personally involved. So in other words, what Elon Musk and Einstein and Spinoza say is that yes, God exists, but he's not involved. And that is the opposite of what Jesus tells us, that he's intimately involved in our lives. That is why our faith in Jesus matters so much. That's why people like Elon Musk and others have to realize that Jesus is true and that he's there, and that they have to place their faith in him if they are to know God. And so in verse 22, Peter goes on to say, "Now that you have purified yourselves by obeying the truth, so that you have sincere love for your brothers, love one another deeply from the heart." Right here in this verse, we see that we're supposed, if we're going to be different, if we're going to have different values, we have to have both truth and love. Now, unfortunately, what we often see is our world goes one way or the other. And even in the church, it tends to go one way or the other. It's either all truth, hit them over the head with the Bible, we often hear in the church, right? Or it's all love. Well, God doesn't judge, God doesn't condemn, God doesn't this, that, or the other. And so we see that even in our culture as well. In our culture, it tends to be, well, you need to do this, 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 or, which most people in our culture is like, anything goes. Love, just love. But right here, Peter points out that love and truth go hand in hand. And see, that's one of the values that makes us different. And that's why sometimes in our world we won't be accepted. We're going to have different values in an unholy world. But we still show love. And we still stand in the truth. See, that's what God is calling you and I to do as Jesus followers. See, in verse 23, he says, "For you have been born again, not of perishable seed, but of imperishable, through the living and enduring word of God. For all men are like grass," and so are their opinions, by the way. "And all their glory is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but what? But the word of the Lord stands forever." When it's all said and done, all the opinions and all the values that have been created by this world, they are all going to pass away, and only one thing is going to remain, and that's God and His truth, and God and His love. That's why it's essential for us to hold on to that truth and to hold on to His love, because it's something that lasts. And then in chapter 2, verse 1, "Therefore, rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind. Like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good." See, it comes down to what you crave. That's what we see here in this verse. Crave pure spiritual milk. What is it that you want? Now, you know that the Lord is good, but you also know that following the Lord is going to be different than anything else in this world. And so the question for us is, will we go back to Him? Will we continue to go back to Him? Will we continue to crave Him? And that is our point today. The point today is this, is that craving Christ is what makes you and I different. It's that we crave Christ in His truth, in His love. How many of you have cravings that at times you just want to satisfy? Maybe it's ice cream from that ice cream shop. You know what I mean? Or maybe we want that burger from that certain burger joint. Is that you? I know it probably is for many of us. You know what? Every time that I go back to my hometown in Okeechobee, I go to one of my favorite places, and that place is this. This is Dairy Queen. Now, you might look at this and think, and this is an actual picture of it in Okeechobee. You can notice the palm trees. But you might say, okay, wait a minute, Danny, it's a Dairy Queen. I mean, all the Dairy Queens are the same, right? Yeah, but I don't know. There's just something about the Okeechobee Dairy Queen. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the memories that are attached or whatever. So every time I go back, I crave some ice cream from the place, I guess, where you could say I fell in love with ice cream. We all have our cravings, and it's no different for you. You have things that you crave after, and our point earlier today that I shared with you is that craving Christ is what makes you and I different. See, as followers of Jesus, we crave Jesus. We crave His teachings. We crave His love. We crave His salvation. And if we go again back to 1 Peter that we read earlier in chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, here's what it said. Again, what did it say? It said, "Therefore rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind. Like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good." See, this term here, crave, is a really important one. If we can go back to verse 2, if we can just go backwards. Here it is again, right? It is a very powerful term. It's a term that really, it's more than just a simple want or desire. It is a longing. And so the question for us is and for you is, do you long for Jesus? See, that's what makes us different. In an unholy culture, we crave after our God, after Jesus Christ, who is perfect in every way. And so there are three values, I think, that we can take from this passage that we've looked at here in 1 Peter 1 and 2, that we can see make us different. And so let's check these out, all right? These three values that make us different, and the question is, do you have those values. And here's the first one. It all makes sense even when our eyes tells us otherwise. Okay, that's the first one. It all makes sense even when our eyes tell us otherwise. You know what? This world that we're in, it just seems like such a mess. I mean, here we are today, right? Watching this from home. It's such a mess with all of the COVID, and then we've seen all the political turmoil. You go on the internet and social media, it just seems so chaotic. And you know what? Sometimes I even catch myself say that, oh, it's just, everything's just such a mess. And yes, this world is a mess. There's going to be mess in a world that is filled with sin. Sin equals chaos. Okay? It's pretty simple to see that. But if you go back to the beginning, when God created the world, and we know Adam and Eve, it was a place of order. It was a place of beauty and perfection. And why isn't it that way now? And again, it's chaotic because there is sin in this world. Your world seems messed up because of the sin in your life, because of the sin in other people's lives, because of the sin that's generally in our world. But when we follow Jesus, when we follow Jesus, our values are different. We know that there is someone behind the scene who is in control. I mean, that's how we're able to push through in tragedy. That's how we're able to continue on through death. That's how when we go to funerals, we grieve differently than those that don't know Jesus. That's why when we have sorrow, our sorrow is different. When we hurt, our hurt is different. See, our different values means that we respond to things in different ways with hope. And that's what Jesus has done for us. See, that's why, because of Jesus, that when that friend at school talks about you behind their back, or behind your own back, it might seem devastating to your eyes, but behind it all, you can know that Jesus still loves you. Maybe it's at work for you. Maybe your boss is making decisions that absolutely make no sense. And everybody is in an uproar, and it's all chaotic, but you can maintain that peace and that calmness through it. Why is that? Because you know Jesus is in charge. See, everything will make sense, even if our eye sometimes tells us otherwise, because God is going to work things out. He's going to work it out for our good. So see, who we crave, Jesus, makes us different. And when the culture gives us the unholy alliance of chaos, Jesus gives us order, and he gives us truth. So again, who will you crave? Now there's another value that makes us different. And that value is that we seek to discover and not disregard. See, too many things, I believe, in our world are being ignored. We don't talk enough in our culture about eternity. We just don't. We're so focused on today that we don't think about, okay, where am I going to be 200 years or 2,000 or 2 million years from now? We don't think enough about our eternity. You know, many of us this week were probably very shocked at the passing of this guy here, and some of you may know him. This is Bob Saget. Bob Saget was one of those characters I grew up with on the show Full House. He did America's Funniest Videos, and he did some other things. But Bob Saget, as far as we can tell, didn't have a faith in Jesus. And it was interesting that just a few hours before he died, that he actually tweeted out all the plans that he had for this comedy tour that he was going to be on. And then the next day he's gone. See, that I believe is where many of us can be, even as Jesus followers. Is that we've forgotten about eternity because we've been too wrapped up in today or tomorrow. See, as Christ followers, what makes us different is we seek to discover God's truth and not disregard it. As many are disregarding the realities of life. Too many are not discovering who God is in his word, but they disregard the realities of life for the falseness of reality. They forget that this isn't going to last. Our lives don't last forever. See, as followers of Jesus, we discover the truth of eternal life, and that's what makes us different. It makes us totally different. Because we know that nothing today is terrible as it is or as good as it is, will last forever. But our relationship with Jesus will. See, that grief that maybe you're going through right now is different because you know that Jesus provides eternal life. The financial difficulties that maybe you're walking through, they're not quite so hard because you know that God owns it all anyway. See, the unholiness of ignorance, of not seeking to discover God's truth, but disregarding it, is replaced. That ignorance is replaced when we discover God's truth. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be ignorant. I want to know the truth, and God gives it to us. And that's one of the things that makes us different, and that's why in an unholy culture, we won't always be understood, and we have to be okay with that. And then finally, this. Something else that makes us different is that we enjoy extensions and not expirations. Have you ever poured a bowl of cereal before? I've got here a picture of my favorite cereal. It's Lucky Charms. I love Lucky Charms. Now, let me tell you, here's how it usually works for me. I go over to our cabinet and I get out the box of Lucky Charms and I pour it into the bowl, and then I leave it on the counter, and then I walk over to the refrigerator and I open the fridge and I reach down and I see a gallon of milk, and I reach that gallon of milk, but as I'm reaching that gallon of milk, I look at something on the top. What's on the top usually? The expiration date, right? And I'll reach down, and it's either still good, or it's not. And if it's not, then I am confronted with three choices. One, still use it anyway and have my cereal. Don't puke. Okay, I know you probably don't want to hear that. Although I did that once, not purposely though, okay, when I was a kid. That's why I look at expiration dates. Really good now. The second choice is what? That I could just eat the cereal dry. It's okay, but it's not the same. Or, number three, the worst option, I just put it back in the box. But see, expirations is what this world is all about. This world is filled with expirations, and the biggest one is our lives. One day we will all expire. We all have an expiration date. We don't know what it is. God knows what it is. But here's the thing. As Christ followers, what makes us different because of our values is that we know that even with an expiration date, God extends to us an extension of life. God has promised us that when our faith is in Him, that our life will be extended for eternity, and that our hope that we have now will get even bigger. And our hearts will be wider, and they will extend more and more to others. See, we are different because we see the possibility that God uses expirations and can change them into extensions. Jesus died, and it looked like He had expired. But what did He do? He rose again. You know what? We might seem down at times, but you can't count us out. We might make huge mistakes, and it looks like, well, that the worst has happened. But God gives us another chance, and what does He do? He extends His grace, and we are made new. And so today, with these different values, we have different values in an unholy culture. I want to give you this challenge. Here's the challenge today. The challenge is, do you resemble the ordinary or the extraordinary? Now, what this means, what I'm saying here in this challenge, is that when your family and your friends and your community see you, do they see someone who's just another person who fits in? Or are you filled with the extraordinary movement and Spirit of God? Now look deep at yourself. Would you say that you are more of a person that fits in? Or the ordinary? Or is God doing something extraordinary in you? Do they see that you love people differently? Or do they see that you have the same tendencies of selfishness that our culture applies? Do you follow the social influencers? Or do you follow the influencer, Jesus Christ Himself? This might be a tough look in the mirror. But the fact is this, is that you don't belong here. And this is not your home. So this week, I want to encourage you to find one thing, one way maybe that you're a little too similar to the culture, and seek out God's truth and be different and extraordinary. Maybe your attitude is really stunk. Maybe it needs to change. Maybe you love yourself more than others. Maybe that needs to switch around. Maybe you've given God the back seat for too long. Maybe church matters only when nothing else gets in the way. Those are things that the culture does. We have to be different. We have to be different. Because see, how can we change our community? How can we give them the hope of Jesus Christ? How can our community be changed by Jesus when they don't even see Jesus changing us? You know, the church has lost its influence in culture. Why is that? Because the church has not been changed by Jesus. It's really been more the other way around. We've been changed by the culture, but not by Him. You know, Jesus said in the most important sermon, I guess you could say the most important speech that was ever given in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, but this is in Matthew 5. He said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. And in the same way," and here it is right here, "in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds." And do what? And glorify your Father in heaven. One time there was a story that was given to an editor of a magazine. This lady wrote this. She said, "One afternoon, my 4-year-old niece, Paige, and my 6-year-old daughter, Ashley, started arguing with each other. And it just got louder and louder and louder. And the mom here says that I was about to intervene when my daughter stormed down the stairs. She was angry, coming down the stairs, and she yelled. She says, 'Mom, Jesus wants us to be the salt of the earth, and Paige is being the pepper.'" It's funny, but it's true. Which one are we going to be? Will we be the salt, or are we going to be the pepper? And so today, I want you to consider that for yourself. Have you been changed by Jesus? Have you even accepted Jesus? Have you put your faith in Jesus Christ? Today, we want to afford you and give you that opportunity. And so today, I know we're online and we're not together, but if you want to make a decision to follow Jesus, we want to know about it. And you can just tell us about it in the comments here on social media. You can email me directly at dberry@4c.church. I'd love to talk with you. And maybe it's that you're following Jesus, but you're not being very salty, and you need some prayer. You need some encouragement. And I'd love to give that to you. And just reach out to me, and I'd love to talk. But with that today, I want to thank you for joining us in our time of worship. I want to thank you, and hopefully we'll be back together again next week. May the Lord bless you, may He keep you, and we will see you soon.